Okay, so to solve this problem, let's think about what makes something soluble in water. So, generally, what solvents do to things that are soluble in them, a good example of the solvent being water here, which I'll draw a bit bigger, is they use some property of their atom, it's not a great circle, but whatever, to pull apart other molecules from each other, right? So, sodium, for instance, or sodium chloride or salt, is very soluble in water because what happens is the positive part, the sodium, gets attracted to the negative, and I should really draw it over here, gets attracted to the negative part of the oxygen because water is a very polar molecule. And the chlorine gets attracted to the hydrogen, which is partially positive. And not only does it dissolve them in the water by pulling them apart from each other, pulling sodium chloride atoms away from other sodium chloride atoms, it even is so strong that it can pull the sodium and chloride away from each other. So it's not going to be sodium chloride because it's very, very soluble in water. So let's look at these two. What would make one of these more soluble? Well, as I mentioned, water is a polar solvent. That means that it's a very polar molecule, and the way it works as a solvent is by pulling other molecules apart from their solid or liquid structure by using dipole-dipole or ion-dipole forces. And dipole-dipole and ion-dipole forces only work on polar or ionic compounds. So which one of these isn't polar? Because that'll be the least soluble, or which one is the least polar? And we can pretty quickly figure out the answer. CH bonds are very, very nonpolar, and CC bonds are obviously nonpolar because it's between the same atom. And so since this atom only contains CH and C bonds, it can't be a polar atom. And since it's not polar, and I'll explain in a second why this is, we know that that's the answer. But why is this one polar? Well, let's draw the structure. You could have looked this up. You could have also figured it out yourself pretty easily. So this is what the structure looks like. We have this O and an H. And notice this OH. OH bonds are polar. And since this one only has one, it's not symmetrical or anything. This is going to be a quite polar molecule. This is methanol, and it is quite polar. And that allows it to dissolve somewhat well in water, as opposed to propane, which can't dissolve at all.